reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's what you went to school for. Now, the role of the public school in the lives of the children that go there is much bigger than just teaching reading, writing, and math. Should parents decide what their kids are being taught?
Yes. It's an easy answer. Let's pray. Close in prayer.
No, we have more to say. So this is the question that we're going to tackle today on the Maven Parent Podcast. Should parents decide what their kids are being taught? Specifically in the school setting, should parents have any input on what their kids are being taught in school? This is actually a question that if you've been watching the news or even the most recent election in the state of Virginia, this is a question that's been coming up across school board meetings across the country, and parents weighing in on the topic of what their kids are being taught in school. A lot of it is around the topic of race and critical race theory and
human sexuality.
Yeah. So these are the topics that are coming up in the meetings. But the bigger question that we wanted to talk about today is, should parents even have a say in that? Or do we leave it to the, quote, expert educators in the school? And so what we're going to do to start the conversation is to play a little clip from the founder of the 1619 Project, Nicole Hannah Jones, who was recently on Meet the Press, and she was talking about this 1619 Project that she wrote.
Which, if you're not familiar with the 1619 Project, it was started in 2019. It was kind of an initiative of the New York Times magazine. And it was the whole 1619 Project is arranged or based on the date, the 400th anniversary of the beginning of American slavery. And what the project attempts to do, and this is according to the project website, it aims to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of our national narrative. Mm-hmm. So that's what the 1619 Project is about. It's been very controversial. Nicole Hannah Jones is the founder, then goes on this Meet the Press interview, mm-hmm. and she says something just as equally controversial as
about parents and what our role should be with our kids. So let's listen to the clip and then we'll talk about it.
I don't really understand this idea that parents should decide what's being taught. I'm not a professional educator. I don't have a degree in social studies or science. We send our children to school because we want them to be taught by people who have expertise in the subject area. And that is not my job. When the governor or the candidate said that he didn't think parents should be deciding what's being taught in school, he was panned for that. But that's just the fact. This is why we send our children to school and don't homeschool, because these are the professional educators who have the expertise to teach social studies, to teach history, to teach science, to teach literature. And I think we should leave that to the educators.
Okay, so there is a lot there to even unpack in that small little clip. One thing she talks about is not knowing where this idea comes from, that parents should be in charge of what's taught in schools or what their kids are learning, which we'll kind of come back to that issue a little bit later. Like what's the foundation for that idea? And so we'll hit on that. But I think one thing that we want to offer as a critique here, number one, is actually her own 1619 Project. Because the 1619 Project is a historical project. She as a journalist is teaching history. She's kind of at the center of this, the founder of this. And just for folks who maybe aren't aware, in the New York Times, this was back in, I believe it was published a couple of months after the Times announced the 1619 Project. There were 5 historians who wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times responding to the 1619 Project, criticizing it, saying that it offered, this new version, right? And that's what they claim. They're reframing American history. It offers this new version of American history that particularly frames American history in terms of slavery and white supremacy. So it's this kind of revisionist history, which of course, and even the historians in their critique acknowledge, hey, it's important to bring those issues to their proper place within American history. But this actually is a reframing and a retelling of history. So there's been some critique about certain things in the project are simply false. Other things are very misleading. And so that project has been critiqued. But the point is, who is Nicole Hannah-Jones? She's a journalist, and she's spearheading this effort to teach history. Well, my question would be, based off of what she said herself and the criteria that she's laying out, that, teachers are the experts. They have the expertise in certain subject matters. That's why we send our kids to them. Well, doesn't she fail her own test here, right? That would be the first critique. She seems to be hypocritical in that she's now spearheading the teaching of history in this project, overseeing this project, even if she does bring in historians, which would probably be her response. Well, why would you spearhead the project? Let the historians do it. Let those who are qualified based upon your criteria, teach it. So she seems to fail to live up to her own criteria. So that's one quick critique.
Yeah.
But I think even probably more importantly, think about what modern education has become.
Yeah, because modern education, we would all admit, I think, has become much more than just reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? What school used to be, probably when our grandparents went to school, reading, writing, and arithmetic, that's what you went to school for. Now, the role of the public school in the lives of the children that go there is much bigger than just teaching reading, writing, and math. We've gone way beyond that. And so when Nicole Hannah-Jones says, where did this idea come from that parents would have input on what's being taught? We're not talking about parents at school board meetings objecting to third graders being pushed to learn their multiplication tables. It's not like we're saying, the parents have all these opinions on when subtraction is introduced to their 8-year-olds. This isn't what we're talking about. By their own admission, public schools now have taken a role in teaching worldview to the kids that attend there in a way that just wasn't there before.
Yeah, this is where it is important to realize, if you haven't already realized this, that education is not neutral. Public education is not neutral. No education system is neutral, meaning you are somehow above the fray. You are completely unbiased. You see everything objectively, and you don't have a point of view. Now, let's just be honest. We all have a point of view. We all have our biases. That doesn't mean we can't get to the truth. But I think what we need to acknowledge is that public education is not neutral. And even more so, I think that's where parents' eyes are being opened. This has been going on for a long time. But I think parents are being kind of awakened to it because it's more aggressive now. And particularly with the issues of race and sexuality and what's now, I think what has been in the schools for a while, but really is now coming to the fore. Parents are waking up and now they're speaking out. But here's the key point, is that it is revealing that educators are interested in offering kind of what they might consider a holistic education. It's not like they're sticking to these subjects and then we're just going to kind of be neutral and let parents teach. No, and we've talked about this, especially with the gender stuff in schools. They want to teach about gender and what it means to be human. They want to offer a particular vision that they take to be true about human nature or about ethnicity and human value, human sexuality, all of these things. And we just recently sent out an email from Maven. And by the way, if you're not on our email list, get on our email list. Go to maventruth.com. Go to our homepage. Scroll to the bottom, and there's a place for you to put your first name, last name, and email address. That'll get you on our email list, and you'll get the free resources that we send out. But we sent out a email that talked about stuff that's being taught in schools, and particularly stuff on gender and sexuality. And we linked to some clips that we put together that covered, or one of the clips was a teacher on TikTok, a kindergarten teacher, talking about how she uses Remy the reindeer. So it's like a stuffed reindeer named Remy the reindeer, to teach her kids about preferred pronouns. These are kindergartners. And she's giving them an alternative view of human nature, that maleness and femaleness is not essential. So what does that have to do with reading, writing, arithmetic? Nothing. So yeah, let's just be honest here. There is a whole world and life view that educators want to instill in our kids.
Yeah, that goes way beyond if they have a degree in mathematics or biology or sociology or whatever, to this point that was made in the clip that we played. So, and you can watch the video that we put together. You can also just go to the websites of school districts. They are very open about their job being much more than just reading, writing, and arithmetic. And we live in Southern California, so I just went to the LA Unified School District website, and there's all kinds of resources and areas that they cover in teaching the students that are a part of the LA Unified School District. And, part of that includes a curriculum and teaching on critical race theory and racism. There's a curriculum you can download on the National Day of Mourning, where you can learn about the day of protest held for Native Americans to mourn ancestors and the theft of their lands. There's social and emotional learning curriculum. Let's talk about feelings. There's stuff about xenophobia and anti-Semitism, engaging students in learning about that, and critical thinking and ways in which students can push back against both. There's LGBTQIA inclusive books, and the group that they partner with, which is called Gender Nations, which their whole push is to get books into public schools that are LGBTQ affirming and into the hands of students. So in the public schools library, this is what Gender Nations is about. So these kinds of topics, and we're not even saying necessarily that all of those topics are bad, but our point is...
Well, most of the ones we just mentioned are.
But okay, let's
but nonetheless,
right, okay. Nonetheless... This is way beyond what we think of when we say, oh, we're going to send our kids to school to learn from the expert in math so they can teach my kid algebra because I don't know high school algebra, or I don't want to teach it or whatever. Okay, we're talking way beyond that.
Yeah, and that goes to her point, right? She's saying, well, they're the experts, and so parents don't have a say in this. They shouldn't have a say in this. We should send them to the experts who know better than the parents.
Right.
But the critique here is, well, wait a second, they're teaching beyond their expertise.
Yeah, a kindergarten teaching her kindergartners about gender and identity, and her saying, you can change your gender. Well, does this kindergarten teacher have an expertise in biology that the parents of these kids don't know about?
Or psychology, if people want to put that gender, theory in the area of psychology.
You can think of all kinds of area. So even that argument alone, taking it on its face, you can see where we already run into problems because the public school and like we've talked about before, the book Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier, and I read this quote before on the podcast we did on gender, but just to reiterate this point, she interviewed the program coordinator for human relations, diversity, and equity in the LA Unified School District, and this is one of the quotes that this person said. She said, "Looking at schools as a source of social justice, our role continues to expand. The outreach now is profound." So they are open about the fact that they are much more than just a place to come and get quote unquote academic study for students. They see their role as much, much bigger than that.
Yeah, the role has expanded. And it's not, hey, my teacher, and if you think about it, it's not until you get to those older grades where then you break it into different subjects, right? But even in junior high and high school or middle school and high school, you have your history teacher, you have your whatever geometry teacher, and they're just going to stick in that lane. That is not the case. So people are teaching. So I think here's the point. This kind of goes against what she's saying here. There are plenty of educators who are going outside of their expertise. And so if we're going to live by her own criteria, well, then that's out of bounds. These people are outside of their expertise.
Yeah. And if they're teaching worldview, morality, religious views, all these kinds of things, then the question is, should parents know that? And I think we all know parents would care. I think there's lots of things anyone listening could think of that they wouldn't want their kid taught.
Yeah.
And so of course parents care. And this is why, there has been that criticism of parents at school board meetings, and why are they objecting? Why are they wanting to know what's in the curriculum? Trust the experts. We know. Let us teach your kids, and then you stay out of it. Of course, keep paying your taxes because we need those. But and this idea that parents aren't experts, let us do it. We'll take your kids and teach them what they need to know, and it's probably a little more than reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Yeah, which I mean, in principle, I don't think is it's not an illegitimate thing, right? Because we would say, on our view, education is the formation of the whole person. And so true education is going to educate all aspects in all subjects. And it's a holistic view. And of course, in education, people are going to teach that which they take to be true, right? So the enterprise itself, we're not critiquing. We're not saying, oh, it's wrong for them to teach what they think is true. No, we just need to be aware as parents. And it used to be, especially when the scope of public education was more narrow, and it was reading, writing, arithmetic as the emphasis. And you had more shared values in the culture. Public education was an institution that was maybe safer, so to speak, in terms of true ideas and false ideas. And it was also more trusted. And so I think what we as parents need to have happen, and what seemingly is happening, is we got to wake up on this and not fool ourselves, and not try to maybe talk ourselves into maybe justifying sending our kid to a public school. Now, that's not to say that there isn't ever proper justification for that. But I think what I want parents to do is just take an honest look, do an honest assessment, because whether you keep your kid in public education or not, either way, you're going to have to equip your kid. But if they are in public education, there might be a level of challenge that you won't find, like obviously in a Christian school, right? And they're going to be a lot.
Maybe.
Yeah. But generally speaking,
Yes.
I mean, a good Christian school
Yes.
isn't going to be offering a a secular view of human nature, that kind of thing. So
hopefully not.
So we have to be honest in our assessment so that we can meet the challenge. Because if your kid is in public school, they're going to have additional challenges, and we don't want to, I guess, walk into it thinking, well, they're just about these things primarily.
Right.
No, they're interested in passing on a worldview, and that again seems to be more and more the direction and trajectory of modern public education. And this is why a lot of parents have made some shifts recently. In the last 2 years, lots of parents have shifted. The homeschooling movement has grown exponentially. I speak at Christian schools around the country. I get to talk to a lot of educators and headmasters and that kind of thing. And there's just been exponential growth there and their enrollment numbers going up. So I think parents are waking up to it. But
yeah, the point being, no matter where, if we send our kids out or not, that Christian parents know and understand that parents are responsible for what their kids are taught. And that goes for all subjects, right? And so, yeah, there's of course, you are going to have times where you send your kids to learn from someone else. And that's great, and that's okay.
And that's your choice.
Yeah. But you have to know as a parent what they're being taught, the ideas that are being presented to them as true, because that's our responsibility. That's one of our main responsibilities as parents, of course, to provide when they're young that proper protection, in this case, from lies.
Yeah, and that, I think, gets us into really the most fundamental issue with what she's talking about here. And that's the issue of parental rights and parental authorities. Because she starts off this interview by saying, I don't know where we got this idea that kind of parents have the right to decide. Well, where do we get that idea? Why do we have that view? And of course, this is where it's, I think, important for us to think biblically, to think Christianly about this particular issue, understand what the justification is in the Christian worldview for this, and then also see how that's borne out in the reality all around us. And so first off, we as Christians need to make sure we have a biblical view of parental rights and understanding why we can say, yes, parents are the primary caretakers of their kids. They're the ones with the primary authority. And yes, a parent has the right to assess and determine what they want their kids exposed to. Mm-hmm. And that really flows naturally out of a biblical worldview.
Yeah, which is why, all the ideas, when we saw this clip, we wanted to talk about it, because the ideas that she's suggesting, of course, there's ideas underneath those about these fundamental questions about who we are as human beings, how authority plays in our lives, who gives anyone authority. The teachers who are the experts, as she said, what makes them an expert? Who gave them that authority to say that? What gives parents the authority, or who gives parents the authority over kids? And if parents don't have it, then who should it be given to? These are all questions that are big questions, or big ideas underneath those questions about where we come from, what kind of beings that we are.
Yeah, they're worldview questions. And make no mistake, worldview is under everything. And it drives, these kinds of ideas, and then it drives our action. And so someone like this is questioning, well, where does this idea come from? Well, if you think about it, in a secular mindset, if there is, in a godless universe, if there is no God, then yeah, that question does need to be asked. We need to ask that of our secular counterparts. Like in a godless universe, where would parental rights come from? Because it seems like you might not have the proper basis for that. But in the Christian worldview, it makes perfect sense. If God is the creator of humanity, then we owe our existence to him. And the way he has created the universe, is, we actually owe our existence to someone else in a lesser sense, right? Ultimately, God is the ultimate source of authority. He's the author of life from the beginning. But then there's a kind of a secondary author, if you will, and that's mom and dad, right? That's our biological parents who are our source of life in a very real and direct sense. So there's two sources of life, God ultimately and primarily. And so therefore he is the ultimate authority. And then our parents. And so if you think about the idea of kind of an author, right? Author and the word authority come from the same root. And if you think about the kind of the analogy of an author, right? An author who writes a story, we understand that author has authority in that story to kind of do what he wills. And so there's a connection between the author or the source and then the authority that person has over what he's made or what he's created or his work of art, right? And that's just, I think that's intuitive. And so in the Christian worldview, we aren't responsible for our own existence. We owe our existence to someone else, and there's a connection between the role of authority that they have in our lives. And so this is what grounds parental authority. Mom and dad coming together, right? Biological male, biological female coming together, producing offspring. That is God's design from the beginning for human families. One man, one woman, becoming one for one lifetime. And that's the context for children. And so therefore, where do parents get this authority? They get the authority actually from God in God's design.
Yeah, I think this is so important to think through and especially think through what the Bible tells us about this, because our culture is questioning parental authority. So I think we need to have clarity on it. So you think about something we all know from the Bible, the 10 Commandments. And
hopefully we all know.
Let's turn
in
there.
This day of biblical illiteracy,
most
we're
people
all
know
affected.
The 10 Commandments. So Exodus, what?
I was going to say, let's test our audience here. Hey, what book of the Bible?
I already gave it away.
Erin gave it away. What chapter? Where are the 10 Commandments at? We should
20.
Chapter 20.
Exodus 20. So thinking about the 10 Commandments, we won't read through all of them, but you basically can divide them in half, because the first half are commandments about our relationship with God.
Yes.
Who God is, how we should respond to him. And then the second part shifts to our relationship in a family.
Yeah.
And it talks about honoring our father and mother. And of course, not murdering. That's an important one. Not to commit adultery, not to steal, not to lie, give false testimony, these sorts of things. So, but the first one, as it shifts towards human relationships, I guess is really the big umbrella. It shifts from our relationship with God and our relationships with other human beings. The first one is honoring our father and mother. And that's not a coincidence. This is, like you said, the natural order of creation. God creates us, and then he creates us with mother and father who have the authority over us when we are young.
Yeah. So the ordering of the 10 Commandments is instructive, right? And multiple commands that first start with our obligations to God as the ultimate author of life, the ultimate authority. And then immediately from God, we go to honor your mother and father, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So when you read that whole verse, there's a picture of flourishing there as well. So it's not just, and this is what I love about God, he's a reasonable God. And there are reasons why he even gives these commands. It's for human flourishing. So our first allegiance is to our primary author, and then immediately we then also have obligations to our parents.
Yeah.
And what that leads to is flourishing.
Yes.
So that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. In fact, Paul highlights that in Ephesians chapter 6 when he points back to this command and says, honor your mother and father in Ephesians chapter 6 verse 2. But he says this is the first commandment with a promise. There's a promise attached to this. And so again, Christian worldview says that the reason, the grounding for parental rights and parental authority is in the creation order and in the reality of creation.
Which just strikes me as something that should remind us that we ought to have reverence towards that. So parental authority to be taken away or to be undermined, if we're going to undermine parent, that's a serious thing. And should be taken really seriously. When parents are undermined, that's a serious thing. Yeah. And shouldn't be taken lightly.
Yeah, you're undermining God's design. You're undermining the creator of the universe and his design for humanity. This is no small thing. This is outright rebellion against our creator. So this is a huge issue. And that's why there's huge consequences with this as well. I mean, when you undermine parental authority, then you cause the unraveling of the family. You provide justification for children to rebel against their parents. And when children rebel against their parents, you have chaos and breakdown in a culture. And we've seen that in our culture. Yeah. We can look at the structure of the family, the rethinking and revisioning of family to things that prior generations never would have even imagined. This was unthinkable to think that there could be a mom and two dads, or a dad and two moms, a throuple, or even same-sex marriage. This is unthinkable 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, and I can hear, a rebuttal to this would be, what about when parents, are abusive or whatever? Well, this is what we mean about taking it, not taking it lightly and having so much reverence for the relationship. So then only in times where parents break that obligation that they have to their child. I mean, if you're going to undermine that relationship, take a child away, for example, it's only under a serious circumstance where the parent is hurting, the child physically, or, we can think of circumstances.
Some kind of abuse.
Yeah. And so all of that to say, it's because this is grounded in our very creation and the very setup for how God wants the family to be established, that we think of this in a much more serious light, certainly than the culture does.
Yeah, and I was going to add, further implications, because it's not just the undermining of parents. When you undermine parents as a primary authority, you open the door for the undermining of other authorities. You undermine respect for any human authority, because here is the primary authority that God has set up in our lives. And you also, therefore, undermine the respect for God's authority, right? So God has designed families to be the foundation of civilization. In fact, Herman Bavinck is a Christian thinker. He wrote in his book, The Christian Family, he writes this: family, state, and church each share this feature, that each is independent of the other. Each has its own origin and purpose, and none came forth from the other. So you got these three main institutions, right? Family, the state, government, right? And the church. These are primary institutions in our culture. They're independent of one another, right? He says they differ, however, in the fact that the family is the oldest institution and came into existence immediately with the creation of the first human couple. The state and the church, however, were instituted after the fall, and in such a way that the church owes its existence to special grace, while the state owes its existence to common grace. And so kind of looking at the created order, right? You don't have the church and the state coming into existence until after the fall. But prior to the fall, God's design has always been the family. Even in a unbroken world, even in a non-fallen world, family was absolutely central. And so this is where, we talk about the family as a pre-political institution. It's not that government came into existence and then determined, we're going to have families. Families existed prior to any government institution, any, lawmakers or, rulers or anything like that. That's what we mean by pre-political. So therefore, think about the implication here. If family is instituted prior to the state, then it seems like family authority is also prior to any political authority. And so the state actually, a healthy state, a healthy government, healthy rulers respect that, recognize the authority that the parents have, a special authority that parents have, special rights that they have in their children's lives that were there prior to the existence of any government.
Yeah, which as you're talking, I'm thinking about how you said the undermining of parents' authority leads to the undermining of basically every other authority, especially in the child's life. But I'm just thinking as a society, we are in an authority crisis because no one knows who to trust, and we just trust the people we trust. But wouldn't you say there's just this crisis of who do we even believe? Of course, with the internet, there's all kinds of places you can get information. So who do you trust? And of course, we have a breakdown of the family in our culture. And so it has led to all these areas of breakdown of authority. And,
you could say that it actually the breakdown of the family starts with the breakdown of religion, and particularly the Christian religion, right? And as we become more secular, as we become more godless, we're just going to see this unraveling of the culture because the proper order of things is the Christian worldview. And it's not like that's just my private religious belief. No, our view is that Scripture and the Christian worldview is actually the truth about the nature of reality. And if that's the case, then you undermine those things, then we're going to see the results. And that's exactly what we've seen. In fact, I think we can make the case that kind of natural law, the nature of things, logic, sociology, and good common sense will back up the biblical view. In fact, we could probably get to that in a second podcast because this is such a huge issue that we do need to dedicate some good time to this because you and I have got to think about you and I as parents. I mean, you and I. I'm for those who aren't
me and you.
For those who aren't watching on the YouTube channel and who are listening to this, I just want to when I say you and I, I'm talking to you out there listening, but I could be talking to you. Anyway, clarification: you, me, her, them, all of us as parents really need to think about this issue of parental authority and rights very carefully, especially as they are eroding in this culture. And as there are those who want to continue to creep in and remove as much of that parental authority from parents. And so we're going to have to think carefully about it. And then there's going to have to be some fight in us. And I don't mean, being a jerk. I don't mean being violent. I mean, but fighting using the appropriate means within the culture to fight for the rights of our kids. Okay, so that sets us up for the next podcast. What we want to talk about more is some of the kind of the common sense approach, even the non-believer. can recognize parental authority. And then we'll get into some practical things that we can do in our homes, because we're kind of talking at a philosophical level here, more worldviewish level, but we do want to get into some practical stuff on how we can establish and kind of confirm that we are authorities that God has instituted in our kids' lives.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.